Imagine a December where the calendar turns to the 25th and nothing happens. No lights strung on houses. No Christmas trees in living rooms. No carols being sung in the streets. Shops are open, people are working in the fields, and children are sitting in school, terrified to even mention the word Santa. This isn't a dystopian novel. This is American history. We like to think of Christmas as an unbreakable tradition, something that has always been the warm, beating heart of winter. But there was a time, right here on American soil, when celebrating Christmas wasn't just frowned upon. It was a crime. A crime that could cost you a week's wages, get your neighbor to report you to the authorities, and label you an enemy of God. This is the story of the 22 years when America banned Christmas. To understand how we got here, we have to go back to England in the mid-1600s. This is the era of Oliver Cromwell and the Puritan Revolution. The Puritans were a deeply religious group who believed the Church of England had become too corrupt, too fancy, and way too similar to the Catholic Church they despised. They wanted to purify Christianity, to strip it down to its bare bones, just the Bible, hard work, and strict obedience. And you know what they hated most? Christmas. To the Puritans, Christmas in the 1600s didn't look like a Hallmark movie. It looked like Mardi Gras. It was a 12-day drunken street party. It was a time when social rules were flipped upside down. The poor would demand entry into rich homes to be feasted. There was gambling, excessive drinking, cross-dressing, and a pagan-like atmosphere called misrule. The Puritans looked at this chaos and saw sin. They argued that nowhere in the Bible does it say Jesus was born on December 25th. They knew that date was chosen centuries earlier by the Romans to co-opt existing pagan festivals like Saturnalia. So, to the Puritans, celebrating Christmas wasn't honoring Christ. It was honoring pagan gods and engaging in what they called popish or Catholic behavior. In England, under Cromwell, they successfully banned it. They outlawed mince pies. They forced shops to stay open. Soldiers actually patrolled the streets of London, seizing any food they thought was being prepared for a Christmas feast. When a group of these Puritans set sail for the New World and landed at Plymouth Rock, they brought that intense hatred of Christmas with them. The first Christmas in America, back in 1620, was a non-event. The Mayflower Pilgrims spent the day building their first structure. Governor William Bradford wrote in his journal that they began to erect the first house for common use to receive them and their goods. That was it. No gifts, no feasting. Just hard manual labor in the freezing cold. A year later, in 1621, some new arrivals to the colony decided they didn't want to work on Christmas Day. They told Governor Bradford it was against their conscience to work. Bradford, being a reasonable man, said fine. You can take the day off, but you must stay in your homes and pray quietly. He returned from the fields at noon to find the men openly playing games in the street, pitching bars and playing stool ball, an early form of cricket. Bradford was furious. He confiscated their gaming equipment and told them that if they wanted to treat the day as special, they could do it indoors, silently. There would be no public fun in his colony. But the real hammer dropped a generation later. By the 1650s, the Massachusetts Bay Colony was a Puritan stronghold, a theocracy where the laws of the Bible were the laws of the land. On May 11th, 1659, the General Court of Massachusetts enacted the famous Christmas ban. The law read, "For preventing disorders arising in several places within this jurisdiction, by reason of some still observing such festivals as were superstitiously kept in other countries, to the great dishonor of God and offense of others, it is therefore ordered by this court and the authority thereof, that whosoever shall be found observing any such day as Christmas or the like, either by forbearing of labor, feasting, or any other way, shall pay for every such offense 5 shillings. 5 shillings. That might not sound like much today, But in 1659, that was a significant amount of money for a laborer. It was enough to make you think twice about roasting that goose. For 22 years, this law was on the books. The goal was to make December 25th completely unremarkable. They called it Fool's Tide instead of Yuletide. Schools were mandatory. Businesses were open. If you were seen with a sprig of holly, you were suspect. If your chimney was smoking too much, suggesting a large meal was being cooked, your neighbors were encouraged to report you to the magistrate. It was a society built on surveillance and spiritual purity. And it wasn't just the government looking over your shoulder. It was the preacher. Increase Mather, a famous Puritan minister of the time, railed against the holiday from his pulpit. He said men celebrated Christmas by mad mirth, by long eating, by hard drinking, by lewd gaming, by rude reveling. He basically called it a gateway drug to hell. This war on Christmas lasted until 1681. So what changed? The pressure didn't come from inside the colony. It came from England. After the monarchy was restored, King Charles II looked at Massachusetts and decided they were getting a little too independent with their weird laws. He revoked their charter and forced them to repeal several laws that contradicted English law, including the ban on Christmas. But just because the law was off the books didn't mean that the culture changed overnight. The Puritans were stubborn. For decades afterward, celebrating Christmas in New England was seen as incredibly tacky, something only foreigners and the lower classes did. Even into the 1700s, if you walked through Boston on Christmas Day, it would feel like a Tuesday. Samuel Sewall, a prominent Boston judge, famous for his role in the Salem witch trials, wrote proudly in his diary in 1685, for years after the ban ended, that he noticed shops were open and carts were coming into town just like any other day. He took great satisfaction that the superstitious holiday was still being ignored. It wasn't until the mid-1800s, nearly 200 years after the ban, that Christmas as we know it truly began to take hold in New England. And it wasn't religion that brought it back. It was pop culture. The publication of Clement Clarke Moore's poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, the night before Christmas, in 1823, and Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, in 1843, completely rebranded the holiday. They transformed it from a rowdy, drunken street festival into a domestic, family-centered holiday focused on children, charity, and cozy firesides. This new version of Christmas was something even the strict New Englanders could get behind. It was respectable. Finally, in 1856, almost 2 centuries after the original ban, Christmas became a legal holiday in Massachusetts. It's wild to think about today, isn't it? We live in a world where Christmas creeps into stores in October. We argue about whether Starbucks cups are festive enough. But the next time you feel overwhelmed by the holiday noise, just remember those poor souls in 1659 Boston, waking up on a cold December 25th, heading out to work in the fields, looking over their shoulder to make sure no one caught them humming a tune, knowing that a single moment of joy could cost them 5 shillings and their reputation. It turns out the war on Christmas isn't a modern invention. It's one of America's oldest traditions.